Pearls of Nonsense About Drones, Christopher J. Fuller, The Secret History of CIA's Lethal Drone Program Reviewed. Now, these are real pearls of nonsense, and this is a short book review. So, more on this later, but you can see for now this is an interesting endeavor by a self-styled expert on drones from University of Southampton in United Kingdom. I first read about this great expert on drones in a review by one Mr. Philip O. Warlick, the second of Air Command and Staff College, who elevated this book and its author to prophetic heights. Having witnessed some drone strikes personally and having extensively traveled in the area affected by the so-called US drone program, I decided to buy this book, which was quite a blunder as I now reflect in retrospect. Blunder in the sense that I learned nothing additional about the drone program. Right from the first few pages, that is the prologue of the book, when he starts discussing Mustafa Abul Yazid or Saeed al-Masri's death in a drone strike. The writer claims that Saeed al-Masri was killed in retaliation for the Bagram attack of 17th, 18th May 2010 or so. Absolute nonsense. I don't know how he reaches such conclusions. Now, the Bagram attack about which this author talks was launched by the Afghan Taliban with headquarters in Kuchlag, Quetta, and had no link with Saeed al-Masri based in North Waziristan. To support his assertions, the author quotes letter from Osama bin Laden held in West Point. Even the authenticity of this letter is dubious. And the source of this assertion is highly questionable, but above all, the organizational setup is totally contradictory, in that an attack carried out by an organization known as Afghan Taliban is linked with a totally puny and insignificant organization known as Al-Qaeda, which I would say that is a bogey. It does not exist. What our brilliant author does not answer is, quote, why US drones should strike a target which has nothing to do with Bagram airstrike, unquote. Or more precisely, quote, why US drones should not target Kuchlag instead of Abul Yazid, unquote. I started having serious doubts about the credibility of the book's narrative. This scribe will offer an answer to these questions in this narrative at a later stage. Our author claims that Abul Yazid had congratulated the host December 2009 attacker, question mark. But this was done by various people on the internet, YouTube and other public forums. Quote, upon the Central Intelligence Agency in 25 years, the personnel killer Humam Khalil Abu Mulal al-Balawi had been a triple agent who played his handlers in order to gain access to those who were coordinating the CTC's drone operations from the ground in Afghanistan. Following the attack, Al-Yazid had praised al-Balawi, blah blah blah, unquote. In a fit of verbosity and oratory, our author makes some non factual claims, but this is very typical of Britishers. The sound of an alarm alerted the analyst on duty. The automated algorithm, my foot, the automated algorithm that scanned the huge electronic dragnet the National Security Agency had thrown up over the Pakistani tribal areas had registered a number of interest. The cell from which the call had originated, says our brilliant author, the cell from which the call had originated was not logged on that huge dragnet. The two agencies, North and South Waziristan, where 90% of all US drone attacks in the last 12 years or so were carried out, are a puny area, not very large, and it is common knowledge that most of so called foreigners, Arab, Uzbek, etc., are in a small area surrounding Miramshah. Now, this map examines Mr. Fuller's assertions. One can call them lies also, because this is a commercial writer trying to sensationalize the issue. He is not a serious writer. As you can see, this is the area of 90% of US drone strikes, 90 miles north to south, and 50 miles east to west is the total area of North Waziristan and South Waziristan. This is the main Taliban base from where US troops were being attacked. This was the major area of US operations. This trashes Fuller's assertions completely. Why on earth was 90% US drone strikes carried out in this area, which had absolutely no connection with the attacks on the US troops in southwest Afghanistan, and which had no connection with the main Taliban base to attack US troops in Afghanistan? It's mind boggling, but a Britisher can write anything, Southampton University guy can write anything, even if he writes pearls of unadulterated nonsense. Nylon socks full of refined refuse, he is believed. Great book reviews are written by Air Staff College characters praising this gentleman, this pedant, this Don Quixote. Now our learned author calls an area 90 into 50 miles as huge. It's not huge. Mr. Fuller, you are from Southampton University. It is not huge. You're talking nonsense. Where the CIA has a huge dragnet, as Fuller brags, but says nothing why the mighty CIA never attacked the area some 1,500 kilometers long along the Afghan border, as you can see here. This area was never attacked. The reason, either they lacked the strategic resolution or there was a link between the CIA and the Taliban. One never knows. The Afghans can do anything. Pakistani border, from where 90% of Taliban attacks on US troops were carried out, this 1,500 kilometer stretch. This is one of the huge loopholes in Mr. Fuller's narrative. Our brilliant Southampton University scholar, self-styled expert on drones, indulges in much dramatics, British dramatics, I would call English dramatics, not suitable for a serious writer of non-fiction military analysis, like describing women operating drones on page 4, describing a drone sensor operator. The sensor operator gently tilted her joystick instinctively compensating for the latency of the signal traveling to an aircraft 7,500 miles. This is some kind of cheap Harold Robbins, or perhaps a passage from the very tasty British magazine Sexpert, which we used to read as teenagers. Certainly looks like a passage from Sexpert or Playboy, but certainly not serious military history. This nonsense that we are reading. My issue with Mr. Fuller is not at all about the human rights or ethical aspects of drone strikes, but why US drone strikes only targeted two small, puny districts, North Waziristan and South Waziristan. And why not Pakistani Balochistan, where 90% of killers of US troops in Afghanistan during the US Afghan war were housed? Fuller has got no answer. Fuller even does not know the geography of the area. And sitting in Southampton University, this man is being hailed as an expert on drones. What nonsense. What an insult to the intelligence of all readers of history. Fuller gives no answers in his whole narrative, which focuses on melodramatics and verbosity, which is neither relevant nor accurately linked to the subject of the book. Examining Mr. Fuller's assertions, as we have done, main Taliban base to attack US troops, why this area never attacked by US drones, so much glorified by Christopher Fuller. In the next Pearls of Nonsense chapter, titled Let Him Sleep, unquote, sensational, pornographic type titles. Let him sleep, so says the Southampton brilliant author. The author makes much of Al Qaeda in US Afghan war, but throughout the narrative fails to prove that Al Qaeda was the major player in inflicting maximum casualties on the US troops in Afghanistan, which were actually inflicted by Mullah Omar, based in the Pakistani Balochistan, and never targeted by US drones, who are so much projected in this book. There was only one US drone strike in Pakistani Balochistan in 2016, when US troops had withdrawn from most of Afghanistan and the war was literally over since 2012. Mullah Omar's group, which inflicted some 75% casualties on the US troops, was never targeted by Mr. Fuller's famed drones. On page 9, our brilliant author, self-styled expert, claims that the Abbottabad raid against OBL was carried out without Pakistan's consent, which may be treated as author's conjecture or speculation, but not a confirmed fact. On page 9 and 10, our brilliant author claims that there are 3 drone programs in operation, and the book is more concerned with drone programs run by CIA, the James Bond that our British author from Southampton University claims to be. 3 drone programs as per Fuller, but no map to illustrate nor any description. He's a pathetic kind of an author. I don't know what Southampton University is doing, but certainly Fuller is an absolute disaster. Now, these are the 3 drone programs run by the US government, drone program run by US Air Force in recognized war zone in Afghanistan, Iraq, etc., left entirely to readers' imagination. Fuller is trying to fool us. Number 2, drone program operated by Department of Defense Joint Special Operations Command. Number 3, drone program operated by CIA. There is no map to explain who runs which program in which area, which is certainly a major analytical drawback of the book. I severely dispute the author's rabid bias against President Bush, like on page 13. This character claims, quote, despite the Obama administration's abandonment of what were seen as the most internationally damaging policies of the Bush administration, questions surrounding the legality and accountability of the CIA strikes make up the third commonly discussed theme related to drones. If the CIA is acting like a military organization, shouldn't it have the relative transparency and accountability of a military organization? Spencer Ackerman asked in 2011 as the agency's campaign increased in intensity. Unquote. As a matter of fact, Obama was a far big disaster not only in presiding over decisions involving unwarranted drone attacks but in causing maximum casualties to US troops in Afghanistan by sanctioning a pointless escalation in Helmand, Kandahar, and Kunar in 2009 and 11. As you can see, the difference between President Bush war in Afghanistan and the President Obama massacres in Afghanistan from 2001 to 2008, only 394 US soldiers died in Bush tenure, whereas in the Obama disastrous tenure, US military deaths in Afghanistan from 2009 to 2015, most of them occurring between 2009 and 12, were 1,411. Afghanistan was 100 times safer in 2008 than it was in 2015. No strategic advantage was gained by the United States with 1,411 US military deaths due to actual enemy action. US deaths occurred because US military commanders like Petraeus and McChrystal were ultra ambitious. Callous indifference. I wrote a book. US political leadership was very bold in getting US soldiers killed in minor tactical actions between 2009 and 2015 and extremely timid in confronting the Pakistani state. Lack of moral courage. The drone strikes that US launched in Pakistan killed minor insurgents who had no connection with 90% US military deaths in Afghanistan. This is the conclusion of my book, presented to be killed on a platter. I am not a US citizen and I deserve no advantage from presenting these facts, but this is written in the larger interest of military history. As I read Fuller's nonsense, repeated impression I got was that this book was funded by the CIA or sponsored by some CIA asset who wanted to whitewash CIA's drone program. At times, the writer appears like a spokesman of the CIA in rationalizing and defending CIA-sponsored drone strikes. Reagan-era chapter of this author is pure hogwash. The author fails to note that Reagan acted as unwitting midwife of so-called future Islamic extremism by extensive capacity building of so-called Islamists, which were concentrated with CIA and Saudi efforts from worldwide into Pakistan's western provinces. Glorification of Haig on page 26 is exaggerated and irrelevant to the main subject of the book, drone warfare. Now he is glorifying Haig, the key achievements of US counter-terrorism policy in the Reagan administration. He's trying to, pay lip service to Haig. Terrorism was never the issue in Reagan era, where the prime US concern was USSR and a low-intensity conflict against the USSR. On page 27, he makes one-sided statements like USSR sponsoring terrorism while conveniently ignoring that USA was doing the same thing in Afghanistan since 1980. The writer's tone throughout is one-sided. He sees all actions not taken by the USA or UK as actions of bad guys while ignoring US policy in supporting so-called Islamists in Afghanistan against the USSR. The problem with Fuller's analysis is supreme confusion Like on page 28, he claims that US Secretary of State identified state-sponsored terrorism and USCA drone program was its logical conclusion. Pearls of absolute nonsense. However, he fails to note that 99% of US drone strikes in Pakistan's Fatah region were carried out against small time non state actors, snuff sellers, who had hardly any connection with vast bulk of US military deaths in Afghanistan. On the other hand, throughout this book, Fuller fails to establish why no US CIA or JSOC or military drone strikes were not carried out against the real killers of US troops, the state sponsored Afghan Taliban based in Balochistan. The writer has nothing to say about so many massive compromises made by Reagan administration with so-called Muslim or Arab states where there were clear indications that citizens of these states were involved in terrorism, how Reagan administration sat like a duck when US embassy was attacked in Beirut on 18th April 1983 or again on 23rd October 1983, how apologetically lame was Reagan's administration response when his Secretary of Defense Caspar Weinberger stated that US lacked knowledge about who did the Beirut bombings, although he was in full knowledge of the fact that the US National Security Agency had an intercept where Iranian state had ordered the Beirut bombing. In 2006 January, a US Second Secretary in Kabul named Duke Scherer summed it up well while defining US bureaucrats' fear of Iran in words, my seniors are wet, PU dash dash, in the end S, wet, PU dash dash dash, S, hiding behind emails, and would have a heart attack if they see a war game plan simulation of an attack on Iran. The irrational US fear of Iran and the resultant US strategic irresolution is nowhere discussed by Fuller. He lacks moral courage. Reagan administration also lacked moral courage to confront terrorism. Just look how they blinked after the 1983 bombings in Lebanon. All that the indecisive Reagan administration could say was not now. Question mark. What was Reagan's policy against Iran or against radicalism in the Arab world? Evasive and apologetic at best. But our author finds no fault with Reagan administration. He finds no fault with Obama. Our author then goes on to glorify George Shultz as the ultimate warrior against terror. The whole premise of Fuller is fallacious. He fails to establish a case that non-state actors caused maximum casualties on US troops in Afghanistan and totally ignores and hides the fact that some 80% of casualties on US troops were inflicted by Taliban based in the Pakistani Balochistan. This remains the most serious conceptual flaw of the book. The author is rightly critical of Reagan administration's passiveness but fails to note that this passiveness carried on in all US policies till to date, including George Bush, Obama, and now President Trump. Fuller misses the essential point that US has always avoided the real hard targets like Iran, North Korea, while going for known entities like Afghanistan or droning small-time characters, snuff sellers in North and South Waziristan Agency. On page 88, our author extols CIA war in Afghanistan but fails to note that there was hardly any fighting in Afghanistan as Taliban simply withdrew to safe havens in Pakistan and Afghanistan was captured without a single US casualty. Al-Qaeda, who Fuller's so much exaggeratedly projects, was a non-player in Afghanistan, while the real player, the Afghan Taliban based in Pakistani Balochistan, were never attacked inside Pakistan by Fuller's favorite CIA drones. Throughout the book, Fuller beats around the bush, talking about Al Qaeda in Pakistan, Fatah region, while totally ignoring the fact that Al Qaeda was a non entity in terms of inflicting casualties on US troops in Afghanistan. The worst drawback of this Yale published book is that it does not contain a single map. Cartographic barrenness and poverty of the US publications. I am surprised and shocked at the cartographic petty parsimony of our brilliant scholar from Southampton and Yale. Our brilliant scholar has no conception about size of groups that attacked US forces in Afghanistan and embarks on this totally quixotic and utopian endeavor to educate the world about US drone warfare. My fault. As an example, the map shows below the approximate size of the so-called extremist groups in Afghanistan. The Taliban, of course, you can see the size. The Pakistani state, Afghan Taliban Hikmatyar group. Haqqani group, much exaggerated, is the smallest. The TTP of Pakistan, which did not attack US troops, is very small. US NATO forces are very small in size, covering limited area. Afghan national security forces are even more limited. What Fuller has been doing in this 369 book, A Total Loss of Stationery, is talking about US drone attacks on the smallest groups in AFPAC, the Al Qaeda. What Fuller states and his entire perception about Afghanistan is flawed, but the Journal of Military History of USA, a bastion of pedantry, is praising Fuller, writing glowing reviews about Fuller. Certainly, some strong state sponsors financing the Journal of Military History reviews also, based in VMI, Lexington, Virginia. There is no hesitation if I state that this book is one big failure, and it is so because the writer's basic perceptions are totally flawed and out of touch with reality of the situation in Afghanistan.